Great. Well, thank you all for coming for the next part 2 of the leadership philosophy of General Colin Powell. So let's begin with a short prayer and then we'll continue with lesson number 4 where we left off last week. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, O Lord, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O Lord, who enlightens the hearts of your faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that in the same Spirit we may be truly wise and ever enjoy his consolation through the same Christ our Lord.
Amen.
And Our Lady, Help of Christians,
Pray for us.
St. Thomas More,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Great, so we continue today. It's probably part 2 of a 4-part series on the leadership philosophy of General Colin Powell. And without any further ado, we'll pick up. Last week, rule number 1 was about making others mad as a rule of leadership. The importance that the people being led by the leader are actually coming to the leader and sharing personal problems with him or her as a sign of confidence in the leader. And then rule number 3, just reverse that for a minute, was about being befooled by experts and elites, because very often experts and elites can lack expertise and real knowledge, real wisdom and leadership and managerial skills of a company. So, and they're all, jam-packed here. So I'll continue now with number 4, and then we'll read through the commentary. So number 4, I'm not sure how well you can see it on the camera, but don't be afraid to challenge the pros even in their own backyard. Don't be afraid to challenge the pros even in their own backyard. When I was overseas studying recently, it's very easy to feel intimidated at various things because you're in a new culture, new language, you don't have all your friends there, and you can feel very much on the back foot. And these professors, they're all supposed to be very clever and experts in their own field. Very often they are. But it can be the same thing with leadership. Sometimes we can think, well, so-and-so, look how many degrees they've got. Look how many years experience they've got. Look how many, the consultation, look at their fees. And all these things, we can look at it and think, wow, they must know a lot. And you know what? They may. And they probably do. But that doesn't mean that everything that comes out of their mouths is in fact genius, pure wisdom. Remember, an expert coming to give you advice about an organization and so forth, and very many organizations do this. They'll bring out a consultancy firm from outside and they'll pay big bucks to help them sort out their own problems. But the consultancy firm doesn't actually know anything about that particular organization. They know lots of other things about other organizations. But about your own organization, who is the expert, do you think? You. You know your own organization. You see it from the inside. But, and it's helpful to have somebody from the outside looking in. That's absolutely true. But it doesn't mean that everything that they say is necessarily going to be full of wisdom and without error. So what does Colin Powell have to say? He says, learn from the pros. Absolutely. Learn from them. Observe them. Seek them out as mentors and partners. But remember that even the pros may have leveled out in terms of their learning and skills. Sometimes even the pros can become complacent and lazy. Why? Well, because they've got a bit of a reputation as being a professional, as having a lot of know-how with various things, and they've stopped. Now the response they get from people is, oh, you're really smart, you know everything what you're talking about, and they get cozy in all of that, and they've stopped growing forward, which means in these sorts of things that you actually start to slide backwards. It's actually a bit like spiritual life. When a person stops striving for greatness, they inevitably start sliding back. Sometimes even the pros can become complacent and lazy. Leadership does not emerge from blind obedience to anyone. Wow, that is amazing. And again, for a spiritual organization where obedience is held as a virtue, blind obedience is never a virtue. And the same in a corporation. Just because the chief executive officer has said this is the way that things should go, doesn't mean they're infallible. It might mean they're just having a senior moment at that time, or it might mean that they just weren't thinking clearly, or they were a bit emotionally upset because of something that had happened that morning. So in the meeting, they weren't thinking at their best. So it is possible for somebody, even with a lot of experience, to be mistaken. Xerox's Barry, then he gives an example. Xerox's Barry Rand was right on target when he warned his people that if you have a yes man working for you, one of you is redundant. I'll explain that in a minute. Good leadership encourages everyone's evolution. One of the common things, unfortunately, with any leader, be it in a corporation, be it in the church, government, whatever, is to be acknowledged as the leader, to be affirmed as the leader. And there's a natural human desire for that kind of affection, that attention, that kind of approval. But the idea of true leadership is always to seek the overall good of the organization. The overall good of the organization means that everybody working in the organization is actually attuned to the needs of the organization at their own particular level. You can't have the interns or the new people coming in to be worried about the overall structure of the organization and the overall running. No, let them concentrate on their things. But the leaders, the main leaders, should be looking at the overall structure. But if they're not aware of what the interns are going through, and they're not growing, then they're actually not looking at the overall structure of the organization and the overall good of the organization. So why is Colin Powell actually quoting Barry Rand and saying that if you have a yes man, then one of you is redundant? Some people working for an organization who want to advance themselves, and that's a very natural desire and a very legitimate desire, think that the way to go forward is always by saying yes. Yes to the leader. Oh, you are so good. You are so wonderful. Gosh, your genius shines through again. Can you just say that again? Where did you get that from? What a pearl of wisdom. Blah, blah, blah. Of course, I'm overdoing this because just to try and make a point. But the reality is, this ego-feeding kind of attitude, and it's never done so obviously and overtly like this, but it's subtle. It's subtle. It's that paying of deference constantly to the leader and being afraid to offer contrary viewpoints. Why? Because an insecure leader is afraid of hearing contrary viewpoints, because he or she will see them as a threat. But a secure leader sees different viewpoints as, well, a chance to look at the world through different eyes. Also, a secure leader is able to look at, and in fact encourages, differences of opinion, different disagreement even with his or her own thoughts. Why? Not for the sake of disagreement, but for the sake of scrutinize what I am saying. Scrutinize it. Look at it thoroughly. Tell me if I'm being a goofy leader, or do you really think I'm heading in the right track? Because I realize I've got to make the final decision as the leader, but I want to make the right decision, which means right for me and right for you, right for everybody, even though it may cost people, put some noses out of joint. So having people in the organization who are yes men, in fact, do not help anybody. And that's why Barry Rand, quoted by Colin Powell, says one of you is redundant. And so now, neither is Colin Powell saying you want people who are constantly contrary. I say white, they say black. I say up, they say down. I say east, they say west. That kind of attitude actually can be very exhausting and can be very counterproductive. that's not helpful leadership or helping the leader. And some people by nature or by character are a bit like that. Just because they've got to be heard, they've always got, they always know better and so forth. So you see how a lot of stuff about effective leadership often involves very much looking at one's own personality, one's own strengths and one's own defects, and keeping the defects in check and realizing when I need to exercise my gifts. And this can play for a whole lot of things. I mean, when I was in Rome, and it's not a very positive sort of example, but I'll try and put it for filming purposes. And he said to me, this person used to work in one of the Vatican departments, and said to me, there's so much about crawling and careerism and, well, I'll just leave it at that, crawling, and saying yes to one's superiors. And one thing I've learned, and he worked there for several years in this department, he says, one thing I've learned is that generally there's enough of them, everybody criticizes the crawler, but generally you keep it up long enough and persistent enough, it tends to pay off. I thought, oh man, why? Because the leaders very often, if they're under pressure, if they're not thinking clearly, if they're very vain people, then they don't see through the motives of somebody who is working for them. That they either want their job or want to just advance. In other words, careerism. And it takes wisdom for a leader to actually sift through, is this person being contrary, or is this person disagreeing with what I'm saying because they actually want to help me? And in time, a leader has to sift through the characters of those who work for him or her. But to avoid both extremes, I think, is an important rule for good leadership. And so, on the one hand, just being a yes man all the time, or on the other hand, being always, well, I've got something different to offer. It can become very exhausting, very tiresome. But learn from the pros, learn from them, seek them out, because they've gotten there for a reason, even though maybe it's not always entirely merited. But to learn from them. And it's the one who can't learn that's got the biggest faults. The one who can't learn will never grow, because they don't think that fundamentally they have something to learn. Any questions on that before we move to lesson number 5? Yes?
So, if crawling does sometimes pay off.
Absolutely, not sometimes, yeah. According to this guy, it pays off often, yeah.
Often. So, where do you kind of draw a line then? So, something like, would it be better just to be a crawler because it's going to pay off anyway?
If you just want to get ahead, crawl. I know I shouldn't be saying that, but if you just want to get ahead, crawl.
But if you want to be a leader.
If you want to be a true leader, you see, that's the difference. We're talking about leaders. You'll see me and hear me make constant comparisons. The good leader, the secure leader, the strong leader. Those who aren't true leaders are actually more like managers.
Yeah.
The manager is somebody who is just maintaining things as they are. Doesn't want any disturbance of the peace. Doesn't want to upset anybody. Doesn't want to cause any difficulty in any way. They're managers. They will never help things move forward. But if you want to be a true leader, then you've got to do these other things. Your question, though, yes, being a crawler, being a yes man, will usually get you a lot further, because you are not an obstacle. And I can tell you how you do it. I mean, it's not that I've learned this firsthand, but I've seen others do it, and it's amazing, the charm. People, they will blind, they will feed into the vanity of a leader. And but in the end, what's the cost? And the cost is your integrity. It's the fact that when you are alone, you are by yourself at night, and you think, I've really sold my soul. And I hope that realization ought to make somebody wake up to see that crawling is not worth it. Is not worth it. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll move to lesson 5, sorry. Never neglect details. Whenever one's mind is dulled or distracted, the leader must be doubly vigilant. Jam-packed leadership wisdom there. Never neglect details. Why not? They're only little details. It doesn't matter. Just a bit of that. You're so fussy. Just focus on the essentials. How often have we heard that said? I've heard it said many, many times. Why are the details important? Because there's a whole saying about it. The devil is in the details. The devil's in the details. Why is it that details are so essential? Because in details, particularly if I neglect them, that's where problems usually emerge. It's often in the nuance of something that determines whether a person understands me correctly or they take offense because I'm not precise enough. So, for example, I say, you are always doing this. Let's say you're always butting in or interrupting me or something like that, which is actually not true. In fact, what I ought to say is, you sometimes interrupt me and it's very annoying. See, it's the sometimes. Now, the person can respond and say, I don't always interrupt you, excuse me. You've accused me of something that's actually not true. And it is. It isn't true. And it's just a silly example. So, details. Whenever one's mind is dulled or distracted, the leader must be doubly vigilant. Why is that the case? Well, whenever one's mind is dulled or distracted, are they performing at their peak? Absolutely not. So, if my organization is under stress, it's because it's the end of the month and we've got to do tax statements or whatever it happens to be, or because assignments are due, or because something else is happening, then the leader has to think for him or herself as well as for everybody else. It means the expectations that we can have on our co-workers is now no longer the same or cannot be the same. Let me give you a silly example. Most cars now have, in new cars, don't have a spare wheel as a normal proper wheel. It's these simple wheels that are just meant to get you by. Well, one of the side effects, I suppose, of these flat puncture wheels or flat tire, the spare wheels, is that the speed of those tires is usually limited to about 80 kilometers an hour. So it means then, if you are going at in a speed limit of 100 kilometers an hour, 110 kilometers an hour, you cannot go to that speed safely. So when you're driving, until you get your tire fixed, you're driving with that spare wheel for however many days until your tire is fixed. That is going to mean whenever you go from little trips here or there, you cannot drive according to your normal habits. But the force of habit is going to be a powerful one, and you will more than likely forget to factor in an extra 10 minutes or an extra 15 minutes it's going to take you from because you're driving on a spare wheel, unless you're driving short distances and it's less than 60 kilometers or less than 80 kilometers an hour. So you'll find yourself getting yourself caught out. Why? Because the mind is dulled, because you're not actually thinking clearly. Why? Because a factor has changed. In this case, you don't have a proper wheel as your spare wheel. Now, you translate that into your organization. If a person has a loved one who has just died, don't expect that person to be able to function at full speed until perhaps months down the track. You've got to kind of keep that in mind. Someone else has had some financial difficulties. Someone else has had a relationship breakup. Whatever it happens to be, those things are important factors, and a leader has to keep those things in mind. So a leader is very much thinking about who the people are, rather than just getting the objectives of the organization met. If you don't know the leader, your people who are working for you, getting the the objectives met, you will not get the objectives met because you've got to take care of the people. Strategy equals execution. All the great ideas and visions in the world are worthless if they can't be implemented rapidly and efficiently. Good leaders delegate and empower others liberally, but they pay attention to details. Here's the word again. Every day. Every day. It's not good enough just to do it when in the first few weeks or months of coming into a new leadership role, paying attention to details. Always. Think about supreme athletic coaches like Jimmy Johnson, Pat Riley, and Tony La Russa. Bad ones, even those who fancy themselves as progressive visionaries, quote unquote, think they're somehow above, quote unquote, operational details. And how many leaders we see like that? They think, oh no, that's someone else's job to do the details. It's beneath me to somehow get involved in the details. No, it's precisely why you are there. Take care of those details. Somebody else has neglected them. Okay, maybe you need to speak to that person to make sure they're done, but if they're not done consistently, then something is going to suffer. Paradoxically, good leaders understand something else. An obsessive routine in carrying out the details begets conformity and complacency, which in turn dulls everyone's mind. That is why, even as they pay attention to details, they continually encourage people to challenge the process. They implicitly, now let me just see how I can lower the screen a bit. Down. I can't do it any. How do I do? Thank you. Implicitly, that's right. So they implicitly understand the sentiment of CEO leaders like Quad Graphics' Harry Quadracki, or Oticon's Lars Koland, and the late Bill McGowan of MCI, who all independently asserted that the job of a leader is not to be the chief organizer, but the chief disorganizer. In other words, he's not saying that the leader is supposed to cause chaos and make life difficult, but he's supposed to go and see how things can actually be improved. And that means, as you pay attention to the details, well, you know what? This little detail is actually taking up too much energy. Can we make it more efficient? Can we make it simpler? Yes or no? Good leaders understand something else. Okay, so obsessive routine. So that's just an important point to keep in mind, that an obsessive routine in carrying out the details just begets conformity and complacency. So that's not what he means by keeping the details, just doing it in a routine kind of manner. No, it's got to be part of one's character and personality. I pay attention to the details. So you might say a healthy OCD-ism, you know? So that would be the thing. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah. All right. Right, we'll go to lesson number 6. How are we going for time? Yeah, okay, good. Go back to number 5 again. So one more point. Something about the details that I should mention is this. When, little problems, and I'm not sure if he's going to actually cover this one in a later lesson, but I want to hit it now, just in case he doesn't. When we're looking at, this is part of paying attention to details, moving on problems, little problems even, moving on them quickly. Why? Many a leader, their approach is, oh, let it go, don't worry. Oh, that doesn't matter, that's fine, it'll just go away. You know what? It may go away. More than likely, it won't go away and actually develops into something bigger. Why? Because every problem within itself contains a mechanism to become an even bigger problem. and you name anything you like, there's just something in it that people will either get frustrated and walk away, yeah, that's possible, or they're going to be motivated to complain. They'll write a letter of complaint, they're going to waste an hour or 2 hours on their problem, and then that letter comes in. It now has to be attended or addressed by somebody in the organization. Maybe an inquiry is initiated to solve that problem. Why? Because I didn't address the problem when I should have done so. Now, okay, somebody can say, well, can you really handle all the problems? Well, some problems, yeah, they'll drive you mad if you try to solve all the problems. And it's not physically or mentally possible to solve all the problems of an organization, at least not yourself. But whatever you can solve, try and solve them and come in on them quickly. So, yes, question.
How does a good leader remain vigilant? And, could be in their position for such a long time. How do they remain doubly vigilant and not exhaust themselves?
To be doubly vigilant, one of the things that, again, I've learned over the years and just trying to put these principles into practice is that the leader should, in trying to be attentive to others, to not fill up his time or her time so fully that he doesn't or she doesn't have time to think. A leader, I would say, put on your plate 70% of your time dedicated to various things, but try avoid having days that are so full that you cannot then take on unforeseen things, because the unforeseen elements will always crop up most days. And if you've got a full day that you've stacked into your calendar and then something comes over the top, well, you're going to have to stay 2 or 3 extra hours to do the work then that you were supposed to do. But what doesn't change, you might say, well, that's fine, that's just part of the job. Okay, but then you go home, you're extra tired that night, and if that happens one day, fine, it'll take you 2 or 3 nights sleep to catch up on that and recover. But if that's happening with some regularity, then eventually your energy levels, which are generally fixed, that's going to remain the same. You're just going to wear yourself down. And one of the things that will begin to go is your vigilance, because you won't see things crisply anymore, and that can only have adverse effects for the organization. And I mean, we all do this, right? We're all guilty of it, but that vigilance, one simple word, my goodness, it's so pumped with meaning. So, any other questions? Great, so now we'll move to lesson 6. I like this one. You don't know what you can get away with until you try. What's Colin Powell saying? Is he saying, buck the system? No. Is he saying, just try and deceive people? No. Let's keep reading though, and then I'll comment afterwards. You know the expression, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Well, it's true. Good leaders don't wait for official blessing to try things out. They're prudent, not reckless. But they also realize a fact of life in most organizations. Get this bit. If you ask enough people for permission, you'll inevitably come up against someone who believes his job is to say no. Isn't that the truth? My goodness. So the moral is, don't ask. Less effective middle managers endorse the sentiment, if I haven't explicitly been told yes, I can't do it. Whereas the good ones believe, if I haven't explicitly been told no, I can. There's a world of difference between these 2 points of view. That's just amazing. What he says there about, if you ask enough people for permission, someone will just think of a reason, whether it's because they're just scaredy cats, whether they're because they're full of worry about the world or about the organization. They're afraid that you might just put us into debt. Oh, well, if you do that, you might just have an accident and then we're up for a lawsuit and whatever. And things, you know what? in the face of that sort of person, you might as well not get out of bed in the morning, because you might just do something you'll regret. See, that is a very negative way to look at things, and it's a leadership killer. It chokes initiative. Whereas an idea comes to you, tease it out a bit, talk to a few friends, say, okay, or colleagues, what do you think of this? Do you think it could work? How about that? Yeah, why not? You know, they can foresee a few little pitfalls, but okay, shall we go with it? Or do you, no, there'll be somebody in the group who will say, I think we should check it. I think we should check it. And then, that's when you open the doorway to basically getting no's said to a lot of good initiatives. So he's not saying be reckless, be crazy, but he's just saying, look at things. Sometimes you can bend the rules. I mean, these rules, most rules are not made by God. They're rules made by human beings, and they were made for a particular time and place, and they don't necessarily apply still or apply to the same effect or to the same degree. So be prepared to say, okay, that's what the rule says, but can we do things better? And sometimes you can. So, okay, and then sometimes you might get the wrong answer or whatever. You say, okay, I'm sorry, I did that. But there's a world of difference between these two sentiments that he says. So, a good leader knows how to explore other possibilities. It's a bit like, if I can use an example with canon law. There's different attitudes, obviously, that can approach canon law, church law. So you've got people who just say, okay, it's just literal meaning, and literal meaning understood according to their own internal schema. And then there are others who say, well, it's just a guide and whatever, so they just go do their own thing. That's not right either. But there is a sense in which the law can be understood properly, and there's always the principle for interpreting canon law is always understanding the mind of the legislator. What were they trying to teach us in this law? And sometimes there's new developments that have happened in culture, in the world, whatever it is, that mean, okay, this particular law now can actually be interpreted in this or that way. And that's the kind of thinking that Colin Powell is actually encouraging us to look at. How are we going with time? 10 minutes. Okay. Any questions on that? I think it's pretty straight.
It's just trying to find a balance between wanting to listen to your
initiatives.
Those that want to listen to those that are under you.
Yes.
And take on criticisms, but also not wait for a no. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
not wait for a criticism? Or?
He's asking, no, in this particular principle, he's saying the leader is asking permission from those above them for permission.
Yeah.
And a true leader looks at the situation, a scenario that presents itself, and says, okay, you know what, this can go. Is it within our power to do it and to make it happen?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. What could be the fallout? Well, this could happen, that could happen. But shall we take reasonable risks? Yes, we can, and we'll be fine. Now, a true leader will go from that and go ahead with it. A second best leader will look at that and say, oh, and they will always see the glass as half empty rather than half full. And so they will make more of the potential pitfalls, and as a result, they won't achieve great things because they're afraid to try something new. They're afraid to go on the edge, so to speak. Many years ago, I was in the process of becoming a Reserve Navy chaplain, and one of the things, I was meeting one of the jet pilots there, the fighter pilots for the Navy, and he said, I think he was a fighter pilot. He was a pilot anyway, and he was telling me, with normal aviation, the pilots are always taught to stay within the boundaries. You stay in the middle. You don't push. If your plane can cope with this many G-forces on the wings for a turn, well, you don't stretch it to that point. He says, in the military, though, we want to go to the edge. because it's precisely how we develop our skills and realize what we're capable of doing or not doing. And in a combat moment, the maneuver that you've practiced in training by going to the edge while observing safety and whatever the limits of your aircraft, you come to see what you're able to do. And great pilots or great racing car drivers or great whoever are always, okay, let's see how far I can go. And that develops, and it can be a subtle thing between the true seeking of greatness or just giving into impulse of arrogance or something. But you'll begin to see the difference, because you'll see, if it's just impulse of arrogance or something like that, that the results are not yielding good things. They're actually creating more problems. But you'll see that in hindsight. Whereas if you take good opportunities, you think, you know what, this is great, that worked. Good, let's do it again. And then you get to know that these ideas you have, doesn't mean every idea you have is going to lead to a good result, but you'll get to know there's enough of them there to actually follow them and seek to pursue them as fully as you can. Great, I think we're next lesson, and then we can finish with this one. So lesson number 7. Keep looking below surface appearances. Don't shrink from doing so just because you might not like what you find. What's he saying? He's saying the true leader is looking at the whole reality. The whole reality doesn't mean just what you see with your eyes. It means always looking deeper. So if everything looks really smooth, you think, well, okay, this is too calm to be all right. There's something else going on. The people are too quiet, or they're too this or that. Okay, there's something that's not being made known to me. I've got to go digging. Or, I don't know, a mother or father at a family dinner, and the children aren't talking. Okay, that's unusual. Or talking over each other. Well, that's unusual, because you know them. And then you say, okay, something's happened. All right, what's wrong? And you don't get any answers. But eventually you press hard enough, and the children start to speak. Well, so-and-so did this, and I did that at school. No, Mum, he asked for it, he did this, that, whatever, he got beaten up, he was picked. The truth comes out. Why? Because the surface, it just didn't add up, you know? So he's saying, keep looking, always look below. And that means when working with people, you're always trying to work out what are the motives, what's driving somebody. And in the terms of the world, the career and all that, that's a very good thing. If someone is ambitious, to advance, absolutely. Work hard and you will be rewarded, and you will advance. Don't try to advance though by walking over people, by trying to run other people into the ground. Go forward on your own merit. And a good leader knows how to recognize a worker like that and then reward them accordingly. And that's by working to the, seeing, well, what's your real drive going on here? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, is the slogan of the complacent, the arrogant, or the scared. It's an excuse for inaction, a call to non-arms. It's a mindset that assumes or hopes that today's realities will continue tomorrow in a tidy, linear, and predictable fashion. Not necessarily. Pure fantasy. Colin Powell says, in this sort of culture, you won't find people who proactively take steps to solve problems as they emerge. Here's a little tip. Don't invest in these companies. How often we've heard that said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So to put it in another way is the great is the enemy, or the good rather, is the enemy of the great. We've got a situation that's good. It's working. But can we make it better? can we make it great? People who suffer from this or don't know how to look at this lesson, they will always say, no, it's fine, it's going all right as it is. So a recent example I've come across is about fundraising. So look, our normal fundraising, having a raffle, having this, having a fun night, whatever, that's been the way we've raised money. Okay, that can be one way. You can keep on doing that way. Or you can actually go ask people who are millionaires and say, can you give us a few $1,000s for this cause? Can you give us however many thousands of dollars for that cause? And it's actually a much quicker way of raising money. And there's obviously lots of different ways, but that's going from something good to something great. And a person who doesn't look below the surface is not looking for opportunities to make things great. And it's tragic then, because this will also be seen, this will also be seen or make itself felt. People who live in that mentality, not trying to make it better, they will get less satisfaction out of their work. They might tell you they're happy or they're enjoying things, but they're actually, at the end of the day, they just rock up to the office or go home or whatever from the office, and they'll tell you that everything's fine, but there's no life that's coming from their work. Why? Because they're not trying to improve it. And eventually, it stops giving you the satisfaction that you once got from it, because there's nothing new. And it's newness that often gives a human person, the heart, that satisfaction of excitement. This is different, whatever. It's a new angle on things, and we all need that. So even in our own workplace. Okay, any questions on that? I think we're run out of time, so let's leave it there today, and then we'll pick it up next week and see how far we go from there. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you all.